Hi guys, welcome back. In this video, we'll be looking at creating reusable controls by utilizing control templates. So I've basically created a little clone of the SmartThings app, very rudimentally, only for the purposes of demonstrating how to create and implement these reusable controls. So basically just have two tabs populated here, and then you can also go in here and see a typical settings page layout. So we'll be building quite a few reusable controls and using content presenters as well that will allow us to wrap our controls around other elements. So let's get started. So I've reset the project and created a branch called Start Year, which you can clone if you want to follow along. I'll drop the link in the description below for the GitHub repo, so you can check out the Start Year branch. And basically at this point, it's just a bare bones vanilla MVVM MAUI app, nothing special about it. So it's not typically how I would set up a project. I like using something like Prism that implements MVVM a bit cleaner. But for the purposes of this video, I wanted to keep it as simple as possible so we can only focus on setting up our reusable controls. So this is the app that I'm trying to build a version of a clone of. Not gonna make it exactly the same, but essentially if we have a look at the various tabs, the one thing that is in common here is perhaps these cards that has some transparency. So I'm just gonna keep the transparency the same on all tabs. And if we go into a device, there's also a lot of reused setting controls here with toggles. So we can also build something for that. So the first thing I'm going to do is just add a folder to house my controls and then add a new item, .NET MAUI, a content view XAML. The first control I'm going to create is just a basic card that we can use in many places. This might not be the best example, but it's a basic one to start off with. So I'm just going to call it card. What we want to do here is replace the contents of this content view with a content view.control template, and inside that add control template again. So now this content view already has a default control template applied to it. And it will become clear a little bit later why we want to do this. So in this case, I'm just going to use a frame and set my margin to 0, set my padding to 11, set my background color so it's a little bit of a translucent color. So set the alpha channel to 60 and the rest to black. And I don't want a border here, so I'm just going to set the border color to transparent and set a corner radius of about 20. And what we can do here is add a content presenter. What this will allow us to do is essentially be able to wrap this card around other things. The way you would specify elements inside a frame, you can now use the card and just specify elements to be placed inside our card. So any elements placed inside the card control will be basically overriding this location in the file. I hope that makes sense. So this is perhaps not the best example for the first control, but it is a very basic example. So we probably could have just changed the style of our frame and then we could have had the same result. But I just wanted to start off with something very basic just to kind of give you an idea of how it works. So coming over to the Home tab, our view model currently has some mock data for us, just for a bunch of the devices that needs to be displayed there. So in my Home tab that's binded to my view model, I am just going to alter the device list. So inside the data template, so this is just in a collection view using a collection view because we want to have the controls in a kind of a grid layout side by side. So we can then use our card. We first just need to add the include for our controls, and then it knows what to include here. And I'm just going to add a basic little label in here so that we have something to look at. Our device list is using the device model inside it. So I'm just going to display the title here as text. Okay, great. Let's have a look, see what that looks like. Okay, great. So we can see it is displaying it. It's just the content isn't really large enough to really fill up that space. But we do have the right border radius. It is a semi-transparent card that we can now apply across the board. Great. So the next thing that we want to do is kind of use that card control in another control to kind of create this device card, I guess is what we can call it, which contains an icon, a title, a name for the device, and a status. So we can create a new item here. Again, choosing the content view, and let's just call this device card. And again, we're gonna replace the content of this content view with content view.control templates, and inside that specify a control template. So let's add a reference to our controls folder, which will allow us to use our card inside this control. And I think the thing that's going to work best for this type of layout, probably a grid of sorts. Let's start off with a grid. Add a row definitions. Can give the first row about a height of 30, and the second row can take up the remaining space. So in the first row we want to have an image. Limit its height request to 25. Give it a source. So we now want to add some properties to our control, some bindable properties that we can bind straight from the view model into our control. So the way we can do that is by using template binding instead of a normal binding. This basically tells it that it wants to bind to the control templates content view itself. So we will create these properties in a bit. So I'm just going to call this icon URI for now. And then in the second row, I'm just going to use a vertical stack layout. Maybe just give it a slight spacing between these text elements. So we're going to have a label, size small, and again, we want to expose a property. We can specify this here. We can say title, and we're going to have another one. Let's make this one slightly smaller. Caption. Can maybe even create some hierarchy here with the text color, something like a light gray. And then this will be the device's name. And lastly, it will be another label for the status. Can keep that as to like that. Great. We can set a explicit size just to make sure that it doesn't grow to fill the whole page. That should do it. Great. So now we just need to create these 4 properties on this device card control. And we can do that in the code behind. So the first property that we want to create is the title. So I'm just going to say public static read only bindable property. This will be our title property. So there's a little shorthand method to kind of generate these properties that I'm just going to paste in here. I'll provide a better way of doing this shortly. So this basically just creates a bindable property, and it sets a bunch of default values to make sure it's a two-way binding and by default, we don't use the property change method, but you can override any of these parameters. And just need to make sure the declaring type is equal to this content views type. But I'm going to show you a way that we can use a little NuGet that I created that implements a source generator that generates all of this code for us on the fly. But I just first want to show you how to do it manually in case you ever want to. So we can say create bindable property with a name of title, and we're gonna specify our title property now, and the default value is just gonna be an empty string, and it will, because of generics, it will figure out that it's a string type that we're trying to create here. Again, all of this will become a lot simpler after we've created our first one. So we can then say public string title, and I add our getter and setter. Even auto completes it for us, which is quite nice. Great, so now we have exposed our title property, and because we have a template binding here with the title, it will bind to this controls property itself. And in our home tab, if we instead use a device card, you will now see that we have access to the title property, which we can then say binding title. So we could also just have just created the entire device model as a property and use that directly inside our XAML. But for now, I'm just going to create the separate properties to show you kind of how that works. So once you've created your first one, you can just kind of copy paste that for the rest. So we also have an icon URI property, icon URI, and this is called an icon URI. And we have a name and a status. They're all strings. Name. Oh, see, I already made a copy paste issue here. So we need to specify this as the property. Otherwise, it would have set our title property and we would have ended up into a nasty situation trying to figure out what went wrong there. And here we want to use the name property instead. Great, so we have name, and then lastly we just need the status property. Great, so we have all four our properties here. So we can now use them in our home tab. Great. So let's run this and just see what it looks like at this point in time. There we go. Almost correct. We just need to left align our icon. So we can just come in here and say horizontal options is start. So what's great is once you've created a control, tweaking it in one place will then update it throughout the entire app. So it ensures consistency in your UI UX experience and ensures that when you fix a bug or a UI issue, it kind of resolves throughout the entire app. So again, this wasn't perhaps the best example of a reusable control using control templates, since we could have just created this in a data template. Seeing that it's already in a list, we could have just created a data template and set the data type to the device model, and we could have binded directly there. But I think this kind of starts demonstrating the power of the control templates and how much time they can save for you in the future. Now, the one thing that's quite tedious is this code behind. It's almost over 50 lines of code already, and it's just 4 properties. So what I've done is added a little NuGet package to nuget.org. So you can just go to manage NuGet packages, and we can search for bindable property generator. It's perhaps not the best name, seeing that I should have maybe put in MAUI or something in the name, but it is my first NuGet package, so please don't judge. And there are two parts to this. There's the attributes part. So you can see it's by App Alchemy, so you can install that one. And then there's the source generator. Here we go. Install that one. Great. So essentially what this does is it generates all this boilerplate for you, so that you only have to specify this one line for a property. So you can decorate this property with a generate bindable property, and then just specify the type of the property. So type of string in this case. And then it will generate this whole piece of code for us, as well as this whole method. Sorry, just missing a bracket there. Basically, or 2 lines of code that's replacing, that's about 5, and then the method was also quite a lot. So you can already see that it's starting to generate some of this. It sometimes takes a little while the first time around, but you can control click into that, and then you can actually see the generated partial class that it's generating for us on the fly. So let's just do the same thing for our icon URI, and for our name property, and for the status property. And it should generate the required properties for us in a second. We can control click into that, and you can see all the generated code. So it went down from over 50 lines to 23. So it helps quite a bit, especially if you start building much larger controls that has 20 plus properties. Then it just makes it a lot readable, and it removes the human error element of copy pasting. Sometimes if it takes a second and it doesn't want to, you can just remove like the Y and save and add it back and save, and then your errors should go away. Great, so that's a lot more compact, and we've created a reusable control. So the next control that we're going to build is going to have 2 parts to it. If we go to the Life tab, we can see they have like these LifeCards that has both a comfortable layout and a compact layout. So let's see if we can build a control for that. So I'm just going to come in here, add new item, new content view, and this is going to be a LifeCard. We're going to replace the content views content with the control template. So one thing that could be handy here is maybe creating an item template to kind of speed up this creation process. So if we add in a label, for example, and just some text, and add our template binding to title, since a lot of controls have a title. And then in the code behind, we can just quickly copy the title property. Great. And then you can head over to project export template, save any unsaved changes, and select an item template from this project. We want to export the LifeCard template and just call this something like a reusable control template. Quick template to create reusable controls. You can add a little icon if you want, and you can just say finish. So now the next time you launch Visual Studio, so let's just quit Visual Studio and launch it again, it will be a lot faster to actually create our reusable controls. So you can now, if you now right click and say add new item, you can see it added our item template here. So if we then say, I probably shouldn't have added spaces in the name, but that's okay. Let's just say a reusable control test. And you can see that already created it for us, and it's clever enough to fill in the name here for us. And it's a lot faster kind of working from this, but since you can kind of copy paste the property and quickly fill in and add the rest that you need. So it's just another little life hack to make your life easier. So let's create our LifeCard. So we essentially are going to want to create two types of layouts, the compact and the comfortable layouts. So I'm going to do this slightly differently than what we did previously. So I'm actually going to add the control templates in this content views resources. I'm going to say content view resources and just move my control template over to there and not specify it by default. Great. And we just need to give it a key. So X key. So this will be the comfortable layout. Okay. And let's just copy the controls include from here. And inside our control template, again, we're going to want to use our card control. And it basically has a title there at the top, a description, and then a large image in the comfortable layout. So we could probably get away with something like a vertical stack layout. Let's see. So we can specify a vertical stack layout, maybe add some spacing in here as well, and move our title to the vertical stack layout. Maybe make it a little bit larger. And yeah, we want the title template binding. Next, we need our description. Just copy paste that label, change it over to description. The font size can be small, and then we just need an image with a source of the image URI. And let's just limit the height request to 150. Great, so we have a comfortable layout. Next, we can create a compact layout. I'll copy paste that, rename this to compact layout. Great, so the compact layout is a little bit more horizontal. So you still have a title and a description, but you now have a much smaller image on the right hand side. So I'm going to use a grid for that. I think there's always a lot of ways to skin this cat. Column definitions are limited to 100 the image. Then still going to use the vertical stack layout on the left hand side, the title and the description. But then I'm just going to move the image to the right hand column. So the vertical stack layout is going to be grid.column 0, and the image is going to be grid.column 1. And let's just make this a width request to also be 100. Okay, so we have our comfortable layout and our compact layout, but we still need a way to actually switch between these. So there's a couple of ways that you can do that, and I think the simplest way is using data triggers. So data triggers, maybe I should just open the page first, the Microsoft Docs page. So you can have a read through the data triggers on Microsoft Learn, but it's essentially just a way to bind to a property and immediately set state on your control. And I think it will become a lot clearer with an example. So let's just create one and then we'll take it from there. So what we can then say is add our content view dot triggers and add a data trigger to that. So the first property that you need to specify is what are you binding to with your data trigger. So we're going to create a property in our code behind. So we can call it maybe is compact layout. And because this is not in a control template, we can't use the template binding. So we're going to have to find a different way to bind to our content view itself. So the one way that I've seen people do this is just giving it an X name this, and then you can set your source of this binding to that. So then you can say source x reference is this. Okay, and it's currently complaining, saying that your code behind doesn't have a bindable property called isCompactLoud yet. So that's expected. Okay, great. So the next thing that we need to specify is the target type, which is the thing that you want to be applying to, which is a content view in this case. And then we can specify a value. When should this data trigger execute? So if isCompactLoud is equal to true, we'll make it a boolean, then we want this data trigger to execute. And then we can use a setter to tell it what property we wish it to change. So you can say property is the control template property. So we want to change the control template of this content view. And the value is going to be a static resource of CompactLoud. So if isCompactLoud is true, then set the control template on this content view to the CompactLoud. And the inverse we just need to set as well. So if it is equal to false, we want to set it to the comfortable layout. Great. So now we just need to specify all of these properties. We need a title, a description, an image URI, and the isCompactLoud property. So we can just copy this into description, add our description property, which will also be a string, so that's fine, and an image URI. And lastly, we just need the isCompactLoud. So that will be a boolean. There we go. We have all four our properties, just waiting for the source generator to catch up to generate the code for that. So I'm just going to do my trick, remove the Y, add it back. There we go. It's been added back. We can control click into that and see all the generated code in the hidden partial class. You can also expand the dependencies, go into any of the targets and expand analyzers, and then you'll see there's a bindable property generator dot source generators. You can expand that, and then you can actually see all the generated partial classes that source generator has generated for us. So the LifeCard, for example, is over here that we just had a look at. So that's pretty cool. Just saves you a little bit of time. Okay, great. So we technically now have our whole LifeCard, and we can see the warning has gone away now that it sees there is a property of that name. And we can go into the Life tab and add to our vertical stack layout here. So the first two are the comfortable layout, the food and energy, and then we have a bunch of compact layouts. So let's just quickly add those. Let's just copy our controls using over, and this will be a LifeCard, and the title is food. Description, just gonna paste in a little bit of lorem ipsum. I don't know if that's too long, that should be fine. And we just need to, so by default, just need to fix this. The default should be false. So by default, it is a comfortable layout. So then we don't need to specify in our Life tab the is compact at all, because this is a comfortable layout card. I'm just gonna copy LifeCard again, and the next one was energy. Oh, we just also need to specify the image. So I'm just going to use the default image that comes with .NET MAUI apps, which is that .NET bot underscore bot. We can bring that over to here as well. And we can add a bunch of our compact ones, which will be family care and clothing care and pet care. I think that's enough. But for these bottom three, we want to say is compact, layout is true. Can run that again. And here we go. So Perhaps the text was a bit much. We could perhaps just remove the second sentence. That's a bit better. So you can see how quickly you can build UIs once you've set up your reusable controls and how small the actual XAML is on the page itself just by slotting in those reusable controls. The one mistake that I've seen people make is trying to add all possible properties to it that you might ever want to be able to use when they only need a couple. So my advice would be to start small and keep expanding on that controls properties as you need them and try and default as much things as possible. That way it remains small, and the odds are, the chances that you're going to use all of those properties in the future is, it's not guaranteed. So rather start small and then build on top of it as you need it. And then also just finding the right balance on when you want to extend a control and when it's starting to differ so much for that use case that you kind of want to create a separate control for that. So that can also be quite a tricky balance to strike. So another problem that you might run into in MAUI is whenever you try and add a tap gesture recognizer to something like a frame and you have content on top of that frame, then if you tap on the content itself, it doesn't register the tap on the frame. So one way to get around that is setting all the content as input transparent so that it clicks through the content onto the frame. But that can be quite tedious, so let's create a control that does that for us. So we can wrap any control in that, and that will instead absorb the tap and bind it to a command. So we can head over to our controls, add a new item, use our template that we created, and let's just call this AbsorbTap. Okay, so we're gonna need a grid with a content presenter, and we want to set the input transparency of this content presenter to true, so that any content on this that's wrapped in this AbsorbTap control is input transparent and the taps will go through it. Then we can set the grid dot gesture recognizers and add a tap gesture recognizer to that, where we can specify a command, template binding command, and a command parameter. There we go. Then we just need to specify the command and command parameter properties on our code behind. So it's going to be of type iCommand, and by default we want to specify this as null. The name is going to be command and it's going to be command property. So it's going to give you an error because it can't use generics to determine the type of null. So we need to specify that in sharp brackets here. So this is of type iCommand and it's nullable. Great. And then we can copy paste this and just parameter, specify the command parameter property. And this will be of a nullable object type. You can't make the type nullable here in the attribute, but that's fine. It will work even if it's null. Great. So this then allows us to wrap this absorb tap around any element and it will absorb all taps and instead send it to the command with the command parameter that we specify. So we can go to the home tab and then wrap our device card, or we could actually do it inside our device card since we always want to be able to tap on device cards. So the one thing we'll just have to then do is copy our command and command parameter over to the device card and pass it through. So we can wrap the entire card with the absorb tap and then specify our command and command parameter. Great. So So now we can go to our Home tab and then just add our command here and bind that to our view model. So our view model currently does have a device tapped command that's already been set up to take us to the device settings page. So we want to bind to that, but currently the binding context of this data template is pointing to an element in this device list. So we'll have to set the source. This will be a relative source, ancestor type, X type, and this will be of the Home tab view model. Just make sure you have the using in there. So then it knows to bind to our view model. And we can specify a command parameter as well, which I'm just going to say binding dot. So that it binds the entire element from the device list, since that is what we are expecting in our command handler here. So we can put a breakpoint there and run this. So we can tap on the icon, for example, and hover over device model, and we can see it did indeed send that through as our command parameter. So it did work correctly. And our handler was triggered successfully. We can run and it pushes us to the device settings page. So that worked quite nicely. So we can now wrap that around any control that we want to instead have bind a command and command parameter to, and then it will absorb all taps on that specific control, including any of its children. So the last page that I'm just going to demonstrate reusable controls on is the device settings page. So once you tap on a device, it takes you in here, and then there's a bunch of these switches, and it has a title, an optional description, and a toggle. So again, coming in here, we can add a new item, use our template again. So we can't call this a switch, since we'll be using the switch from MAUI inside it, and then it'll have some complications. So let's just call this a switch control for lack of a better word. So I think the easiest way to do this again is with a grid and a vertical stack layout on this side, so that if there's no description, it just won't show the description if we set the is visible. All right, so let's create our grid. Column definitions. We want the first column to take up as much space as it can. Set the second one to only grow as large as it needs to. Then we can have our vertical stack layout, which will be grid.column 0. And let's just set the vertical options to center so that it centers if the description isn't present. And then we can move our title in there. I'll just set the font size to medium, and we can then just copy the label for the description as well and set that to caption. So we want this label to disappear whenever it doesn't have any text. So I'll just say is visible. It's also equal to template binding description, and then just use a little converter that's already been set up. The community toolkit, I think, also has a variant of this, so you might not even have to implement this if you have the community toolkit installed. Basically just checks if the string is empty or null, returns false, otherwise returns true. So I'll just add converter, add the resource, just add the converter to the resources of this content view. Bring the using over for controls, and then I just also want to add one for the converters. Give it an X key, and then we can use the static resource. So this is actually, this name isn't correct. It should be is string not null or empty. So if it is not null or empty, then we want it to be visible. Otherwise, we want it to hide. Great. So then lastly, we just need to add a switch in here on grid.column1, and then the is toggled. We just want to expose as well as a template binding. Fantastic. So I'm not going to add the card control inside this control template, since sometimes we want to add multiple of these controls in a single card. So I'm going to leave it like this. Let's just add the necessary parameters. So we have the title ready, just the description, and then is toggled. So that's also a string. And then we have a bool, by default false, and it's called is toggled. Great. So we can use our switch control in our device settings page. So let's just add a couple of these. Let's just include the using first for our controls. We have a card, and then inside that we have a switch control with a title of welcome cooling and a description. Just add some lorem ipsum to that. And I'm not going to specify the is toggled right now. And then another one of these for auto dry. And then we have two in a single card. Let's just copy that. So let's just add that to a vertical stack layout. So we can add more than one. And that's called the lighting, and no description specified. Okay, and the next one is called beep. And there's a little box view in between them. Height request 0.5, background color, we can make white, I guess. All right, let's see what that looks like. Great, so we can click on Aircon, and that takes us into the device settings page, and that looks pretty great. We can tweak the styling a little bit, add some spacing here and there, but it works pretty well. So you can imagine as you're building up your library of reusable controls, it becomes really quick to build new pages and have the styling conform to the rest of your app. So if we come back to the Home tab, you might think, okay, we're not using the real estate in the right-hand side really. So maybe we can move the icon down there. We can quickly go in, change it in one place, the device card. Instead of row definitions, we can maybe have column definitions, star and 30, and then say this is column 1, is column 0, horizontal options are end, and vertical options are end. And there we go. It updated throughout the entire app, and you can play around with your controls a lot easier. I think we're all in the situation where stakeholders frequently want to make UI changes, and this kind of just future-proofs your app to make it easy to change it in one place and have it reflected all over. I hope this video was helpful, and if it was, please give a thumbs up and a subscribe so that you don't miss out on the future videos. See you next time.